The legend starts, simply enough. A Russian attack aircraft. An American destroyer. The Black Sea. April 2014. By the time it was over, Moscow would claim its pilots had performed one of the most stunning demonstrations of electronic warfare superiority in modern naval history. They would claim the Americans were so shaken that nearly 3 dozen sailors submitted letters demanding release from service. They would claim the most advanced combat system the United States Navy had ever deployed had been switched off, not by a missile, not by a cyber attack, but by a single pod bolted to the belly of a 1970s-era attack aircraft that still used analog instruments in its cockpit. None of it happened. Not a word. And the reason it didn't happen is a story worth telling carefully, because buried inside the gap between the Russian claim and the Russian reality is everything you need to understand about why certain navies project power and certain navies project press releases. Let's go back to April 12th, 2014. The Black Sea. And one very busy, very professional, and extremely unbothered destroyer. It is 9:50 local time. USS Donald Cook, DDG-75, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, commissioned in 1998, is 12 nautical miles from the Crimean coast, making 17 knots on a heading that has been logged, approved, and transmitted to NATO commands since before she cleared the Bosphorus. She has been in the Black Sea for 5 days. This is not a surprise visit. The United States Navy does not do surprise visits. It publishes its deployments, communicates intentions through diplomatic channels, and then proceeds to carry them out with the cheerful indifference of an organization that has been operating in contested maritime environments since before the country, whose aircraft is currently warming up on a Crimean runway, had a functioning government. The morning watch is uneventful. The SPY-1D multifunction phased array radar, the centerpiece of the Aegis Combat System, is conducting its routine sky search, cataloging commercial aviation, tracking the occasional military flight over the peninsula, and generally doing what a system capable of simultaneously tracking over 200 airborne contacts does when there is nothing of particular interest to track. It waits, with the patience of a very expensive and very confident machine. Below decks in the Combat Information Center, the watch team is keeping station, drinking coffee that has been on the warming plate since 700 hours and filling out procedural documentation that no one outside a Navy would understand. The tactical action officer is in his chair. His coffee is cold. He makes a note to get fresh coffee after he finishes the current log entry. This is the backdrop against which history, or at least the Russian version of it, is about to be made. At 9:52, the SPY-1D radar returns a contact. Bearing 275, range approximately 60 nautical miles, altitude low, airspeed increasing. The system classifies it within 4 seconds. Su-24M Fencer, Russian Aerospace Forces, originating from a military airfield on the Crimean Peninsula that, until approximately 6 weeks ago, had been Ukrainian. The SPY-1D, a system designed to track supersonic ballistic missiles in terminal phase trajectory at distances measured in hundreds of nautical miles, has now allocated a small fraction of its processing capacity to watch a 44-year-old attack aircraft fly in a more or less straight line toward the ship. Think of it as the electronic equivalent of a brief, disinterested glance. The system notes the contact. It updates the track. It continues doing everything else it was already doing simultaneously. This is not a compliment to the Su-24. This is just Tuesday. The tactical action officer sets down his pen. He picks up the internal comms handset. His voice carries the tone of a man reporting an item on a checklist rather than an incoming provocation, because in his professional assessment, that is precisely what this is. The officer of the deck acknowledges. He reports the contact with the same inflection he used earlier that morning to report a pod of dolphins off the port bow. He picks up his own coffee. It is also cold. The Su-24 is still 60 miles out. Nobody has moved to get fresh coffee. Here is the pot that nobody in Moscow's briefing rooms spent sufficient time thinking about. Here is the part that makes April 12th, 2014, briefly, genuinely, not theatrically, concerning for about 90 seconds. USS Donald Cook is sailing alone, not because of budget constraints or an oversight, because the Montreux Convention of 1936 places strict limits on the total tonnage of non-Black Sea warships that can transit the Bosphorus and Dardanelles at any given time. The practical consequence on this particular morning: there is no carrier in the Black Sea. There cannot be. The USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group is operating in the eastern Mediterranean, roughly 900 nautical miles away. The nearest NATO airbase with available intercept-capable aircraft is Aviano, Italy, 1,400 kilometers from the Donald Cook's current position. In the time it would take an F-16 from Aviano to reach the Black Sea, the Su-24 currently inbound could complete its business and be back on the ground in Crimea. For 90 seconds, from the moment the contact was classified to the moment the tactical picture clarified sufficiently to establish what the Su-24 was actually doing. USS Donald Cook is the most isolated American warship in a contested body of water since a crisis that predates most of her crew's military careers. She is operating under rules of engagement that have been drafted and reviewed by lawyers and diplomats in Washington who understand that the post-Crimea situation is volatile and that an incident in the Black Sea could accelerate a crisis nobody wants accelerated. The constraint is not complicated. Do not be the one who fires first. Be the ship that was there, professional and present, and came home. What this means practically: the tactical action officer is watching a Su-24 fly toward his ship on a heading that the Aegis system has already modeled into 43 potential engagement envelopes, and every single one of those envelopes is diplomatically unavailable. The SM-2 Block 3 B standard missiles sitting in the vertical launch cells, capable of reaching the Su-24 at this range with time to spare, are waiting in their cells and will continue waiting. This is what professional restraint looks like when applied under genuine pressure. The Su-24 reaches 40 miles. The SPY-1D updates the track. The system notes the aircraft is descending. The tactical action officer reports to the bridge. The officer of the deck acknowledges with the same tone used earlier for the Dolphins. The coffee is still cold. This is the vulnerability window. Not a vulnerability of the ship's sensors. Not a vulnerability of its weapons. A vulnerability of its options. For 90 seconds, the most capable surface combatant in the Black Sea is operating with one hand diplomatically tied behind its back and a Russian pilot, who almost certainly knows this is turning toward the ship at low altitude and high airspeed with a Khibiny L-175V electronic warfare pod attached to his centerline station. Then the 90 seconds end. The tactical action officer finishes his ROE assessment, establishes the track as a simulated approach rather than a committed weapons employment profile, and does something that will never appear in any Russian state media report. He orders fresh coffee. He returns to his documentation. The vulnerability window closes. The intelligence collection window opens. Let us talk about the Sukhoi Su-24M Fencer. The Su-24 first flew in 1970. Let that number sit. 1970. The year of the first Earth Day. The year the Beatles released their final album. The year the Ford Pinto was introduced to a waiting world. The Su-24 entered Soviet Air Force service in 1974. Designed as a supersonic low-level penetration aircraft for striking NATO targets in Western Europe, and represents, in its day, genuinely, an impressive piece of Soviet aerospace engineering. The variant flying toward USS Donald Cook is the Su-24M2, a modernized version with upgraded avionics and precision-guided munitions capability. The upgrades are real. The aircraft has genuine capability that should not be dismissed. The humor is not in its ability to cause harm. The humor is in what its fundamental architecture reveals about the gap between what it was designed to do and what it was actually accomplishing on this particular Tuesday. The Su-24's terrain-following radar The Orion A emits continuously at known frequencies, with a signature the United States Navy has been cataloging since the first Su-24s came off the production line. And then there is the Khibiny L-175V. This is the centerpiece of Russia's subsequent propaganda effort, so precision matters here. The Khibiny is a genuine electronic warfare system. It generates jamming signals in the radar frequency bands used by missile seekers and fire control radars, designed to degrade their ability to maintain track on the aircraft carrying the pod. It is a credible self-protection tool for its era. What it is not, what it physically cannot be, by the laws of electromagnetic physics as currently understood, is a system capable of disabling an Aegis Combat System from the outside. The Aegis SPY-1D operates across multiple frequency bands simultaneously, cross-references tracks between them, and would continue tracking a contact through localized jamming, the way a freight train continues moving through a rainstorm. Jamming an Aegis radar from a single external source would require a power output roughly equivalent to a small broadcasting station. The Khibiny pod weighs approximately 100 kilograms. These two facts are not compatible. Claiming the Khibiny disabled USS Donald Cook's Aegis is like claiming you hacked Fort Knox with a Game Boy and a confident attitude. The numbers do not work. The physics do not work. The story does not work. But the Khibiny does do something on April 12, 2014. It transmits continuously at known frequencies, and at some frequencies. The SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite aboard USS Donald Cook has been waiting to confirm with precision that only close-range direct exposure can provide. The intelligence warfare officer below decks is experiencing something between professional satisfaction and barely contained enthusiasm. It is, by any reasonable measure, the best morning of his deployment. There is a particular quality to the atmosphere in a combat information center when the electronic warfare operators realize the adversary has handed them something genuinely useful. It is not excitement in the way a civilian would recognize excitement. It is focused, quiet, almost reverent attention, the kind a watchmaker gives to a rare movement that has just come through the door. The EW operators are watching their screens and taking careful note of everything being displayed on them. The SLQ-32V 3 electronic warfare suite is designed to detect, classify, and log radar emissions across a broad frequency spectrum. When a known signal appears, it matches against the threat library and identifies it. When a partially known signal appears, it logs the frequency, pulse width, pulse repetition interval, scan rate, and power level, tagged with time, location, and associated platform, and transmits the results via Link 16 to every Allied asset, with a receiver across the theater, within seconds of acquisition. What the Su-24M is broadcasting is not a mystery to the SLQ-32. The Orion A terrain-following radar, known. The targeting radar, known. The Khibiny pod's primary jamming frequencies, partially known this morning, being filled in now with precision that months of signals intelligence work from a distance could never have provided. Every time the Khibiny sweeps a new frequency band, the SLQ-32 logs it. Every time the pilot keys his radio, and he keys it several times because coordinating 12 consecutive simulated approach passes requires communication, and those communications are not all encrypted. The SLQ-32 notes the frequency, encryption state, and signal characteristics. The intelligence warfare officer is composing the outline of a report that will eventually run to 49 pages and will be distributed to the intelligence services of every NATO ally within 72 hours. The adversary pilot is, in the most operationally ironic sense possible, conducting a training seminar for the benefit of the United States Navy and its allies. He is demonstrating exactly what his aircraft can do, exactly how his EW system operates, which frequencies it covers and which it does not, and precisely where the gaps are between Russian claims about the Khibiny and Russian reality. He is doing this voluntarily,
At low altitude, at close range, on a clear day, in front of a ship whose secondary mission on this deployment is to collect exactly this kind of data.
Are they really on clear voice on that frequency? The executive officer asks, appearing at the EW console. The intelligence warfare officer looks up with the expression of a man who has just found something extraordinary in an otherwise routine Tuesday. Sir, I can tell you the pilot's pre-flight frustrations in reasonable detail. He mentioned the weather briefing twice. He was not pleased. The EW operator next to him has not stopped smiling since the contact appeared. This is the best day of his deployment and possibly the best day of his career. And the Su-24 is currently setting up for pass number 7. 12 passes in total. The Su-24 makes 12 simulated approach passes over and around USS Donald Cook between 0952 and 1124 local time, at varying altitudes, some low and fast, some at medium altitude with a simulated dive profile. They are, in the assessment of the tactical action officer and the commanding officer who joins the watch at 10:05, professionally flown. The aircraft comes close enough to read the tail code without optical aids, close enough for the ship's deck watch to observe it clearly. On the weather deck, a boatswain's mate is chipping paint. He has been chipping paint since 8 o'clock. He looks up as the Su-24 makes its 4th pass. Roughly 150 feet above the water, approximately a quarter mile off the port beam. The engine's audible above the sound of the sea. He watches it for about 4 seconds. He raises a hand. It is the kind of wave you give to a harbor tour boat that has come slightly too close. Not alarmed, not encouraging, simply acknowledging something that is marginally more interesting than the paint, but considerably less important than finishing the job. He goes back to chipping paint. The Su-24 climbs away and sets up for pass number 5.
The Aegis Combat System has been tracking the aircraft continuously since 0952, with approximately the computational effort it would dedicate to noting a commercial aircraft's transponder. The Khibiny's jamming, when active, produces a signal. The SPY-1D notes, logs, and works around with the equanimity of a chess grandmaster watching an opponent knock over a pawn. The tracking solution does not degrade. The 43 engagement envelopes are updated continuously. Every time the Su-24 maneuvers, the system recalculates. It was designed to do this against supersonic anti-ship missiles in terminal phase maneuver at low altitude over the sea. Against a 1970s attack aircraft on a commemorative victory lap, there is no more precise word, bored. The cost mismatch is worth noting briefly. Each SM-2 Block 3B in the vertical launch cells costs approximately $1.2 million. The engagement window the Aegis is calculating would require 1 missile. The aircraft would not survive the first one. 1 authorized engagement, $1.2 million. 1 40-year-old airframe. 12 passes. 0 authorized engagements. Somewhere, a hypothetical Pentagon accountant is looking at this and calling it the most cost-efficient morning of the deployment. He is not wrong. At 11:24, the Su-24 completes its 12th pass, climbs to cruising altitude, and sets a course back toward the peninsula. The SPY-1D updates the track one final time as the aircraft reaches the edge of engagement quality coverage. Then the contact degrades to surveillance quality. Then it crosses the coastline. The contact is logged. The engagement envelope calculations are archived. The SLQ-32 data package, 49 pages when the intelligence product is finalized, is formatted, encrypted, and transmitted to 6th Fleet, to the Defense Intelligence Agency, and via liaison channels to 14 NATO member states within the next 48 hours. The threat library for the Khibiny L-175V is updated. The frequencies that were unknown at 950 are now fully documented. The gaps that existed in NATO's picture of the Su-24M2's self-protection system no longer exist. The officer of the deck makes his log entry. Clinical, precise, entirely without drama. 12 simulated approach passes by Russian military aircraft. No hostile action. No damage. No impact on operations.
In the section reserved for system degradation or anomalies, nothing, because there was nothing to record. Fresh coffee has arrived in the Combat Information Center. The tactical action officer drinks it while reviewing the morning's logs. It is, by the standards of the deployment, a reasonable Tuesday. USS Donald Cook will be in Constanta, Romania the following morning. She will complete her Black Sea deployment and transit the Bosphorus 11 days later. Her systems are fully operational. Her crew is fully operational. Her threat library is considerably richer than it was at 950. The paperwork is going to be significant. The officer of the deck picks up his pen.
Now let us talk about what Moscow said happened.
Within 6 hours of the Su-24's return to base, the story began to emerge from Russian state media. The initial version was relatively modest. The aircraft had demonstrated Russia's capability to operate in the Black Sea and had conducted a message-sending exercise near the American destroyer. Factually, not wrong. The Su-24 did fly near USS Donald Cook. The message was received. What the message communicated is where the interpretations diverge. The second version arrived within 24 hours. The Khibiny pod had activated over the Black Sea and successfully disabled the Aegis Combat System. The destroyer had been left blinded, its radar non-functional, its combat capability reduced to zero. The Americans had been rendered helpless. A single aircraft with the right electronic warfare equipment had neutralized America's most advanced naval combat system. Russian state media reported this with the confidence of people who understood their audience was unlikely to consult the published technical specifications of the SPY-1D radar. The third version added the sailors, 27 of them, so profoundly affected by the demonstration of Russian superiority that they submitted letters requesting discharge from the United States Navy. Having witnessed their ship's systems neutralized, they no longer wished to serve aboard a vessel that was, in the Russian narrative, defenseless against one aircraft and a 100-kilogram pod.
Let us address the Khibiny claim precisely, because it is the most technically specific and therefore the most specifically wrong. The Khibiny L-175V generates jamming signals in the frequency bands used by radar-guided missile seekers. It is a point defense system designed to protect the aircraft carrying it from missiles already in flight toward it. It is not designed to, and physically cannot, reach across open water and deactivate a phased array radar suite operating across multiple frequency bands with anti-jamming architecture built in from the ground up. The Aegis SPY-1D tracked the Su-24 through all 12 passes, not because the system was lucky, because it was specifically engineered to maintain track in exactly the kind of jamming environment the Khibiny generates. Claiming the Khibiny disabled the Aegis is like claiming you dimmed the sun by pointing a flashlight at it. The scales involved are not in the same conversation. The 27 sailors, sourced entirely to a single anonymous post on a Russian-language website. No names, no documentation, no corroboration from any identified individual. The United States Navy confirmed no such letters were submitted and that no unusual personnel actions followed the encounter. The story has nonetheless lived a long and productive life in corners of the internet, where it continues to be cited by people who have not looked into it with any particular care. What Russian state media did not report: the 49-page intelligence product, the updated Khibiny frequency profiles now distributed across NATO, the gap analysis between Russian claims and Russian emissions, available to every allied navy in the theater. The fact that USS Donald Cook's operational log for April 12th in the section for system anomalies contains nothing, because nothing happened, because nothing could have happened, and because the Aegis Combat System, when queried about its performance that morning, returned exactly the data one would expect from a system that functioned correctly and completely throughout. USS Donald Cook remained in the Black Sea for 11 more days after the encounter. She came home on schedule. If the ship's combat systems had been compromised, this would have been the moment to return to port. The ship
continued its mission. The log says so. The log is the truth. It is a boring document. It is the most important document in this story. The gap between the Russian claim and the Russian reality is not just an embarrassment. It is a data point, a measurable quantity representing the distance between what Russian systems can actually do and what Russian communications say they can do. That gap is itself intelligence worth having. The United States collected it, filed it, distributed it. The 49 pages already mentioned include a 7-page annex on exactly this topic. What does April 12, 2014 actually mean, stripped of the noise?
It means Russia chose to send a message using a platform from the Ford administration in a moment of genuine geopolitical tension, and that the message was received and acknowledged by a U.S. Navy that remained on station for 11 more days to make the acknowledgement clear.
It means the Black Sea deployment accomplished its primary objective, demonstrating that the U.S. Navy operates where international law permits regardless of stated Russian preference, while generating an intelligence dividend that was, by any reasonable analysis, worth more in operational terms than the show of force mission itself. Russia spent aviation fuel and a maintenance cycle on a propaganda exercise. The United States spent the same exercise on a signals intelligence operation. These are not equivalent investments. The tactical action officer who watched 12 passes and ordered fresh coffee was, by every professional standard, completely correct in his assessment. Threat manageable. Intelligence opportunity exceptional. Coffee necessary. Documentation filed. Watch completed. Somewhere in Moscow, a communications professional is still maintaining the Khibiny legend, still finding new outlets, willing to run the 27-sailor story, still sustaining the fiction that a pod designed to protect a single aircraft from radar-guided missiles somehow reached across open water and switched off the most capable naval combat system the United States has ever deployed. The Aegis Combat System, operating aboard USS Donald Cook and dozens of other hulls in the U.S. Navy, has no particular comment on this. It is busy. There are always tracks to maintain, engagement envelopes to calculate, and threat libraries to update. The April 12, 2014 additions to that library are excellent, among the best single-day collection work of the decade. The Su-24 delivered them personally, at low altitude, in clear weather, 12 times in a row. The boatswain's mate who waved at the aircraft doesn't remember which pass it was. He remembers it was close. He remembers thinking it was interesting for about 4 seconds. He remembers the paint section he had to finish. He finished it. It looked excellent by the afternoon watch. The Aegis was tracking the whole time. The SLQ-32 was logging the whole time. The coffee was eventually hot. Everything was fine. Bye for now.